as is the rest of our team. Um, Before I can introduce Sam, I really think I need to give you all a quick background on Corgan, as some of you might not be aware of who we are and what we do. Um, so I will share that Corgan is an architecture and interior design firm with offices spanning the globe. We work in 8 sectors. We are in aviation and mobility, data centers, education, healthcare, mixed use, multifamily, office, and workplace. Our LA office actually opened about 15 years ago by our aviation sector at the successful completion of the Sacramento Airport Terminal B. And since that time, several other sectors have joined the team, including education, which is the team that I work with. So we have a strong presence here now, and we're growing, and it's a very exciting time to be sharing the wealth of resources that Corgan as a firm brings to our clients as well as our employees here. So Samantha Flores is one of those resources, and as I was trying to make this introduction brief, I had a really hard time because I don't know that there's anything that Samantha cannot do, honestly. But Sam is the vice president and director of Hugo, and Hugo is Corgan's innovation and research team. In this role, Sam elevates data-driven design around the human experience, examining the various impacts emerging technologies and evolving human behaviors will have on the future user experience and built environment. Keeping a finger on the pulse of industry innovations, Hugo provides a platform for Corgan to explore, experiment, and develop products with experts from various industries. And so as it pertains to the presentation this evening, I will share with you that Sam has pioneered human-centered design research around intuitive wayfinding, olfactory architecture, age simulation, and immersive sensory spaces. And wait for it, she's currently a firm resource in AI tool development and deployment, and has designed emerging architectural typologies such as skyports, spaceports, vertical farms, and mobile data centers. So without further ado, Sam, give the floor to you.
Thanks, Tanya. And thank you all for having me today to speak on such a fun topic and one of my favorite areas of research that we have been investigating over the last few years. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. But it may not be working. There we go. Sorry, having a little bit of difficulty. Let's see, which screen is it letting me share? There we go.
You got it? Okay, I was going to say I was going to make you.
It wouldn't let me, I don't like to share without the PowerPoint up. For some reason, it wouldn't let me share. Okay, so we are going to talk today about the future of commercial space travel. And, you know, usually if I was in a room with people, I'd say show of hands, who wants to go to space?
And that's really the last 30 years. You just usually they come in and clean it for you periodically if something was wrong.
Sorry, I thought someone was talking.
Can we please mute if you're not Samantha?
Like the number 4 with eVTOLs road. You can't install it unless
I'll just keep going. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
You also muted Samantha.
I know, I'm sorry. There you go, Samantha. Sorry.
I think we've gotten the kinks out, hopefully.
We're good.
We'll see with the rest of the presentation. I had the same idea as Tanya. I just wanted to let you all know a little bit about Corgan. We've been around for almost 90 years at this point, and we're a growing firm. We're getting close to 1,000 people, and we have offices all over the world, which makes it really helpful whenever we're studying something like spaceports, because spaceports and occupying space is not just a US thing, it's a global thing. And so there are a lot of different conversations that we're a part of across the globe on this topic. And as a part of this firm, I am the director of Hugo, which is Corgan's Research and Innovations Group. And at Hugo, what we do is we really try to look at emerging technologies and shifts in human behavior and what they're willing to adopt. And we try to find the areas where those two things merge, because we think that when those things do merge, they're going to help us understand how we can create new architectural opportunities or new typologies, as Tanya mentioned, like spaceports or skyports or mobile data centers, or vertical farms that are attached to our offices. So we're really looking for those opportunities where people are seeing necessity and where technology can jump in and help out with that design. And anytime that we are looking at a research question, we are not only looking at something that is maybe the building scale, but we're looking at that question from all different scales, because as you can imagine, answering any question takes a lot of different perspectives, both from inside our teams and outside of our teams into the world, and then also across all scales. So anytime we have a question brought to us, say for instance, what's the future of the spaceport? We're definitely going to look at the ecosystem that is supporting that, and the businesses and the financial investment and the people that are interested in that. We're going to look at what that campus design might look like for those spaceports, what the spaceport actually will offer us as a building, how those spaces will turn out, and then what products are the people in the space going to use, and how is that going to affect their experience. And so, as we're starting off this conversation, I wanted to share this video that a principal in our LA office shared with me the other day from his balcony. And this is, if you're not
Tina?
rocket, which lifted off on March 19th. Extremely recently, and it left it off from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. What you're seeing here is a rare occasion. Rarely do they lift off at sunset anymore, but this particular vehicle was actually carrying a batch of 22 Starlink satellites, and it's one of the largest payloads that we've seen from a SpaceX rocket. And this one is actually focused on expanding the wireless internet mega constellation. And this mega constellation that SpaceX is currently building has more than 5,500 satellites. So that's really big. I mean, it earns the term mega constellation. And then what you'll see here is what's come to be known as the jellyfish effect. The dusk launch really kind of provides that ideal condition for setting up the light for the rocket to, really expand that plume against the darkening sky. So it's a really great opportunity, and I hope that all of you got to see this a couple of days ago. It was a really a great launch to kind of watch. But, we're here today to not just talk about SpaceX and what they're doing, but we want to talk about the state of the industry around spaceport design, where we see this moving forward for aviation, and why we're so interested in it. And the biggest way to talk about that is just through the economy. The space economy really is booming, and we're starting to see a lot of impact from the emerging technologies that are supporting space travel and how they're kind of filtering down into our daily lives. But first, I want to talk about the industry itself. And it wasn't really that long ago that passengers were trying to fly in airplanes like these. This is a picture of the Wright brothers. And this was only in 1903. And you may think 1903 sounds like a long time ago, but in all honesty, for an industry that's only a little over 120 years old, it really isn't that long ago to go from this to we're traveling to space multiple times a month. And, for the people that did board commercial flights just right after World War II, they didn't know that air travel would begin to go into the next decade. They didn't even know that it would go to the moon. They did not realize how broad we could take this industry and how we as humans could even go to other planets. And they also didn't realize how soon it would transform how they lived and how they worked. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today. When we talk about the evolution into space, we can't overlook, technologies like Boom Supersonic, this is a private airline company, but this supersonic airplane not only provides faster flight and suborbital flight, but it also allows us to take flights from LA to Japan in, you know, less time. We can go around the world in, you know, half the time that it usually takes. A flight from New York to Shanghai, which normally is about 15 hours or 12 hours, will take anything from 6 to 8 hours. So, you know, one of the things that Boom has, you know, been talking about is this idea that we can connect across the world and really share our cultures in a much easier way. And so, you know, with looking at where flight was in 1903 and where we were in 2023 with Boom, it's, you know, very evident and easy to see that we're on this path of evolution for this next transportation revolution, which is venturing off into the next frontier, which is space. And you can see here a timeline of where we start to see these types of explorations, where we're seeing space tourism pop up and how it's popping up, and then where we're starting to see crewed flights take shape. And you've seen several of those over the past few years, and actually in the past few weeks. What I'm showing you here is, you know, that there are some hints that, you know, changes are really apparent. We're, you know, seeing frequent headlines about SpaceX and Blue Origin and other private companies who are launching their own rockets and deploying those satellite constellations that I just talked about with SpaceX. And these activities used to be primarily the domain of government agencies like NASA, but they're now possible with the private sector because recent technological advances in manufacturing and propulsion and launch really have made it easier and less expensive to venture into space and conduct missions. And so when we're talking about these technological improvements, they've really intrigued investors, resulting in a surge of space funding over the past 5 years. You know, we see a 95% decrease in cost for heavy launches into low Earth orbit. And we see, you know, a decrease across the board in how much it costs to send payloads up to our satellites or to the space station. And then we've also seen a significant growth in aerospace jobs that are specific to the space industry, which is exceeding the current U.S. job growth rate. So we do see a good growth pattern and a good adoption pattern for the space industry itself. And I am assuming that most of you are like me. So when we think of commercial space travel, we may often assume it's on a rocket that looks a lot like this. And this is not the wrong option, but there are a lot of other ways that we are approaching space tourism. And you can see here, we can look at anything from, you know, jumping into the stratosphere from a space jumper opportunity. This is pretty scary once you watch the videos. I encourage you to go online if you're interested, but where you can really go up into the stratosphere and just jump and free fall. And then there's also, you know, a little bit more leisurely, a little less scary floats across the stratosphere, such as the case with Space Perspective balloon rides, which come with, you know, a fully stocked bar and a restroom on board, much more to my creature comforts. And then you can see companies like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin who are developing suborbital space tourism vehicles that really offer those recreational space flights and those experiences to private individuals who are right now paying a very pretty penny. But as we saw with technology, technology will bring that cost down. So we are preparing for the future where space tourism is democratized. And, you know, in 2019, NASA even announced that they're opening the American side of the International Space Station to private businesses and citizens. And they're really clearing their way to a place that was previously inaccessible to anybody that wasn't part of a government-trained astronaut program. So this is a huge leap in the accessibility of space. And, you know, recently in 2022, NASA published a news release detailing all the steps it's taken since this announcement in 2019 to commercialize space, and one of the latest being the signing of the Space Act agreement with Virgin Galactic. And so this agreement, is a private agreement between Virgin Galactic and NASA, where they're helping to create what they call an astronaut readiness program, and it'll identify potential ISS visitors in the next few years, and it'll coordinate their training and transport and procure any of the resources that they'll need aboard the space station. So they're really giving a lot of responsibility to Virgin Galactic, which is pretty interesting. But over the next decade, analysts really do anticipate a dramatic expansion of commercial space tourism ventures. You can see companies here like Axiom Space, where they're allowing you to go up and dock at the ISS through their Axiom portal here, and then you can have a 360 view of the Earth and get that overview effect, which is something that we'll talk about here in a minute. But all of these space pioneers are really, democratizing the access to space and opening up the doorway for not just people to go into tourism, but for the space economy to be built on actual purposeful endeavors. What you see here, we do see on the International Space Station right now, we're doing some biomedical research. Part of that is the ability to 3D print in zero gravity, because this allows us to print organs and to print with tissue that we never before have been able to here on Earth. Zero gravity is exceptionally great at helping us print blood vessels and to print cavities for things like hearts and lungs. So there's a lot of great research that can be had up on the space station and in space. And that zero gravity can help improve that process. And so we do see a lot of pharmaceutical companies getting into the space race and wanting to invest as private investors and then take some space on the American side that's been opened up by NASA to further their research. And it's not just research in pharmaceuticals. We see a lot of manufacturing and construction and assembly companies wanting to go up and understand how they can take advantage of zero gravity as well. Especially because when we're looking at occupying the moon, we are considering lunar excavation equipment. And how is that equipment going to get up to the moon? Maybe we could build a factory in space and instead ship smaller pieces and parts that can be assembled there, either on the moon or in orbit, which is more preferable for the manufacturers. So they are exploring the potential for creating facilities to either create chips or really take advantage of that natural vacuum in space that could facilitate that innovative thin layering of mechanical equipment and reduce or eliminate gases during production as well. And I mentioned something about low Earth orbit, suborbital orbit, and I've also talked about lunar travel. And I just wanted to mention that, reaching orbit kind of requires both a sufficient altitude and a horizontal velocity. And so launches that follow a flight path that's similar to what you see here on trajectory A, those are a little too low. Trajectory B, those have sufficient altitude but are insufficient horizontal velocity. So both of these are considered suborbital, even though they may reach up into that space, while trajectory C is what we call, orbital, and it reaches orbit. And so in order to get to the moon, in some cases, depending on where you're located throughout the Earth, you will have to go into that orbital trajectory and then shoot your way to the moon from that orbit and get into the moon's orbit. So this isn't necessary, but this is one way to get to the moon or to other planets, and something that we like to take advantage of whenever we're planning for our spaceports. And then I also wanted to mention, with the difference in space travel and tourism types that I've mentioned, the economy building that we're talking about, with orbital, suborbital, lunar flights, there will be different types of infrastructure needed and different sizes and at different locations throughout the world. And so we're going to talk about that as a part of this presentation. But first, I wanted to bring your attention to what's happening in aviation and how we can learn from aviation to design our spaceports. So airports have really gotten pretty busy over the last few years. That we are serving millions and millions of passengers daily in most of our airports. And we can actually learn from these master plans for our spaceports. That passenger experience, from booking to boarding, it's a really key driver of the modern airport, and entertainment offerings and innovation, the connectivity, the sustainability, all of those are core goals of our airports today that we can apply to the spaceports. And although there are agreed upon principles for airport design, no two are the same. They're really differentiated across a lot of varying factors and create unique destinations across the world. And that's what we believe our spaceports will do. So how soon can you do this? Well, we can't really book it tomorrow, but we will be able to book our tickets in the next few years as prices are dropping and our spaceport infrastructure is beginning to grow. So what we are seeing right now is a growth in the number of launches that do have humans aboard. So last year in 2023, we saw over 120 launches in total that were going into both suborbital and orbital launch. And then we also saw several, I think it was about 14 that had humans aboard the launches as well. So this is a really significant increase over the last few years. And as you can see, those launches are having successes in a lot of different areas, testing out equipment and testing out human behavior as well. And so when we're thinking about these different types of launches with humans, we have to start thinking about how we're going to provide the infrastructure for commercial space travel. And in the first design phase, we'll be building on and really evolving the design of the current airport campus. This is, where a spaceport can also live, and it can capitalize on the existing resources that the master plan of an aviation or an airport actually can already provide, such as support facilities for maintenance or business and commerce. Not all airports are built for this, but launch pads and landing strips can be accommodated in some domestic airports here in the US. And the site can be reconfigured to reuse existing resources such as waterways and detention ponds, cargo facilities as well, and then other suppression systems that can help designate different blast zones. And then another factor for initial site configuration and building placement will be based on, harnessing energy from the site and expanding net zero energy goals. And then point-to-point travel enables manufacturing facilities and transport to kind of grow and generate revenue. So we see, creating jobs through rocket factories and adding the spaceport terminal in addition to the airport terminal can really build on a current master plan. And from our knowledge of the multifunctional airport campus, we do really understand the importance of various types of facilities within what will be a future spaceport campus. So these campuses can really operate together. And as a major connection point for travelers from near and far, gathering, a gathering place for community and local tourists, and, really becoming a symbol for future metropolitan life, this spaceport can have several building types and functions, and can really create a center for tourism for both entertainment and education, really across the environment. We can also look at creating microgrids for the surrounding community and generating and sharing renewable energy. We can look at vertical farming programs that can provide for both the broad airport campus and the surrounding community, but also provide education for what we need up in space, either in lunar developments or beyond. And so there's a lot of growth opportunities here to both learn from and to implement as new typologies. And the campus itself could integrate different types of research and innovation, designing to manufacture and product launch, different streamlines of creation and ideas. And so we can really start to see this new type of job creation happening on campus that never before had existed on aviation campuses. And I want to talk through a few options that we've kind of explored, looking at the different locations where suborbital and orbital launches could take place, depending on, what type of space tourism or launch mission you're taking. And so the first location is looking at a temperate and seasonal climate. And, really in these locations, communities are really looking for those brighter futures for their citizens, and they're optimizing that mobility and connectivity, and spaceports can really be those hubs for these communities. And this model really kind of anticipates the growth of smaller and smarter cities that are more aligned with today's lifestyles. And here we're looking at, decentralizing, but interconnecting, not really suburban, but not really sprawl. And we're also in these temperate climates, looking at ways that we can develop new types of integration with both technology and an appreciation for the Earth around it. Because if you'll remember, we're going to space where there's no Earth. So we have to remind people when they do come back from space, where they live, and give them a bigger appreciation for the Earth that they do live on. So we are looking at smaller towns, smaller domestic airports, where we do see the most promise to start with spaceport integration. Additionally, we're looking at a couple of offshore locations that are closer to the equator. And in these locations, they don't necessarily have to integrate into the cities, but they can have more innovative design approaches. And the importance of place and context are for sure still there. And they will become a differentiating factor between spaceports with commercial launch facilities, but because they are on the water and they are taking from the Earth, they do kind of inspire travelers to connect back to home before they depart. And then also, there's this importance of sensory experiences, because these are things that people are leaving behind for some period of time, even if they're just going for some space tourism. Destination and duration is an extremely important part of the space travel and space tourism industry. And so, you never know what you're gonna miss once you're up there, depending on how long you're there. So we do want those little things that can connect us back to the Earth. In location 3, we are looking at a desert climate. We do have some clients that are very, very interested in the desert climate. And this is interesting because sustainability is at the heart of desert spaceports, and these types of spaceports can really accommodate growth efficiently, and there are a lot of ways that we can eliminate waste and emissions, and we can integrate those kind of emerging modalities. We're not always greener in these spaces, but we can provide car-free city models in these types of spaces as well. And then we can also, start to think about things within the circular economy and provide those highly skilled career paths for talent in these places where upskilling is not always available. So we're really excited to kind of create that global network for future development at these locations. And then the last area that we've been looking at are those harsher climates that still sit in a great space for orbital launch. And in these harsh climates, what we're learning is that we can use parts of our planet to really ready ourselves for those inhospitable climates that we'll experience on other planets. So these provide a good space for education and learning about how we can accommodate, test the resilience of our equipment, what we'll need, and better develop more durable machines for the missions themselves. Because not everything is just going to be space tourism driven, we will also have mission flights. So we can simulate the physical, the emotional, and the psychological effects of extended periods in non-natural environments at scale. And, those types of simulations are extremely important. And that's because the way that we experience travel is about to change. It really is. It's not just about how we should move through the airport or the spaceport, but really about what the experience is doing so, and the experience of that travel and the experience of the return. So, one thing that we know as aviation designers is that planning for new aircraft and additional passenger numbers, that's pretty simple. But planning for the passenger behavior, especially when it's to an unknown and to some people a very scary unknown, that's really the hard part. And so so, we actually did some extensive research on the human experience here. One of the first things that stands out is the appreciation that astronauts get for the Earth once they get into orbital out of their orbital launch. And so you can, read here, you can develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. This feeling is called the overview effect. And when astronauts first see the planet from space, they go through these really intense emotions. They see our home against this blackness of space, and they have a really profound experience about it, and a really deep connection to humanity as a whole. And this can really lead to a lot of unexpected emotions, and in a lot of cases, if not all, has alternated the astronauts' perspective and worldview when they return to Earth. For example, some astronauts may no longer identify with specific nationality or culture, and instead see themselves as, one people living on one world. One astronaut I spoke with earlier this year mentioned he had such a hard time readjusting to life here on Earth, with the kind of petty drama and bickering, and he sought out more and more opportunities to kind of return to the isolation of space to feel better connected to the people that are here on Earth, which was a really strange comment to me, but he felt it so deeply. He also mentioned that the hardest thing to get used to once he did return to Earth was the fact that the clouds moved, and I thought that was kind of funny. He said he was so used to seeing it from space and from above that when he was underneath it again, it really gave him vertigo, and it was the hardest feeling of displacement he had ever had to endure. But when we are talking about the birth of the commercial space industry, we're actually talking about introducing average people to these harsh environments that, used to be reserved for highly trained astronauts. And industry experts really do predict that commercial space travel will become more affordable and regular within the next 10 to 20 years. So when we're thinking about these average people like you and me who are going to be going to space, we really need to understand what that experience is and how we can provide, as designers, a holistic approach for the future passengers of this new typology. And it is critical that we understand the various human states and behaviors that occur before and during and after space travel. I've listed a few here. We've talked a little bit about the overview effect, but there are a few others like zero gravity adjustment, the space fogs, third quarter phenomenon, isolation, living in those hostile environments. All of these things can take a toll on someone's mental health and well-being, and also their physical health and well-being. So it's really important for us to know, as these people are going into either just space tourism, space jumping, or space for a few days versus a few years, there are varying levels of education, training, and treatment that not just the programs can provide, but our facilities as well. And, what we do at Hugo is we really do like to get outside perspectives, and we talked to several astronauts as a part of our research. And we also investigated astronaut journals that are publicly available to really understand how they see and approach, the design of the space station, and then how they also respond to returning to Earth and what they feel during their travel. And so, a part of this, we're trying to find pain points and potential generational differences, across looking at journals and talking to astronauts today. But really, some of the things that came up the most were, talking about the space fogs and the isolation and not being prepared for it, or being prepared and then not experiencing it the same way that they were. And then here, again, talking to another astronaut who said, if somebody told me you're going to get carried away looking at the Earth, I would have said no way. But yeah, when I first looked at it, I cried. And I thought, everyone has this type of experience. But it's really interesting to look at some of the others as well. And when we are thinking about how to treat space fogs, how to help people kind of adjust to their habitat, how to even enhance the muscular dystrophy that you're experiencing there on the space station, we have several tools that we use to analyze our buildings every day. And these tools could be adapted to help us better understand what we could do to design for future future space stations and lunar development, and eventually Martian development as well. So one of the greatest opportunities, kind of resulting from the commercialization of space is designing new experiences that just don't rely on legacy systems. And looking here, we call this, reducing the tyranny of the screen. So it really does cost thousands of dollars to put a pound of a payload into outer space. And every product really has to earn its spot on that rocket. And so on the moon and in Mars as well, digital interfaces won't be confined to screens because they really just can't be. And so screens don't last long enough. They're too heavy. And so we have to think about digital and more mobile ways to share information. And so we're looking at these NUIs, these natural user interfaces, where there aren't any screens that could clutter up physical environments. And instead, we're eliminating that omnipresence of physical notes or charts or graphs and, 3-ring binders hanging around that distract people and their eyes or feel cluttered within a living space that is tight quarters and a little bit isolated. And that said, not all boundaries need to be physical. Outer space just kind of happens to be the perfect playground for the metaverse. So perhaps, really having a good parallel to our physical world, or the only one that kind of makes sense. And we can, maybe talk about that in a different conversation. But another thing that we are looking at as part of the human adjustment in space is really time. The body runs on a circadian clock, and it naturally resets every day by the sun's light. But a lunar day, with sunlight cast on the moon's surface, is only about 14 Earth days. A lunar night is the same duration, which means 14 days of light, 14 days of dark. And, that can severely disrupt someone's circadian rhythm. So how can we design spaces in our space station, in our orbiting facilities for research, or in our lunar facilities that approach lighting design to provide a sense of time that really kind of supports that human connection back to Earth? And then how can we also model that back in our spaceports, to really help people navigate and prepare them for that light change once they get into space. So really looking at these improvements in the quality of life for these travelers as well. We talked about zero gravity adjustment just a little bit. One astronaut that we spoke to mentioned, he said, I knew I was standing upright, but I, still felt upside down. And despite the fact that everything was, adjusted and was normally oriented around me, I was falling over once I returned. And, what he realized through studies with physical therapists is it wasn't necessarily that he was experiencing vertigo all the time. He was also having a muscular loss. And in fact, what we learned is that if we were to travel to Mars, astronauts will not be able to get off the spacecraft and just get onto Mars immediately. The muscular loss that they will experience in that travel to Mars is so significant that they would have to use a walker in order to exit the spacecraft. So looking at, using a gerontological suit would really help us kind of understand that movement a little bit more. And then, one of the things that we started to notice, most problems on the ISS are really caused by equipment malfunctions or incorrect procedures, but there was actually, one particular launch that had to return to Earth because they kept smelling something burning, and nothing was burning. And actually in space, you can't smell, but they kept smelling it. And it was a collective mental space fog. And space fog is generally accepted as the disorientation or distorted vision, a duller thinking. Some astronauts have called it space stupids, but really it's just this train of thought and this space in your mind where you're experiencing this during spaceflight when the cause is really unknown, but you just don't feel all there. You just don't feel like your IQ is at its most highly operating level. And a lot of that can be attributed to high CO2 levels in the space. And so, we're wondering, how can we prevent this? How can we change the way that we measure CO2 in the space? How can we change the way we design for CO2 in the space? And we already do this here on Earth. So we could apply some of these metrics and some of these design methodologies to our spaces on the moon, on Mars, or in the International Space Station as well. And I did mention that scent is, not possible right now in space, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible everywhere on the ISS or potentially in habitats. And one of the reasons why we're looking at scent in space is, scent is a strong indicator of memory. So when we think about space, we remember 1% of what we touch, we remember 2% of what we hear, 5% of what we see, which we as architects design visually all the time, but we actually remember 35% of what we smell. And that's because the association between fragrance, emotion, and memory is not just the invention of poets. It's really this phenomenon that's rooted in the very structure of our brains. And so, we've been conducting research for several years into olfactory architecture. And, what we have realized is that as space astronauts and space travelers who are gone for long durations, we actually could use vialed scents to help them remember their families, to help them think back to their homes, to help remind them of the space where they came from. And this can actually help us reduce the third quarter phenomenon, which is part of any travel. And this is actually travel that you could take today for different, vacations. What we've heard is that in the third quarter of travel, there's always a point that is the most tense point. You're about to leave. You also know that you've still got work to do, or there's still something to be done. And so it's the point where tensions are high, emotions are running high. And in space travel, it's the point where you miss your family the most. So how can we replicate some of those scents on the space station specific to those passengers? That's what we're researching today. But back on Earth, we're looking at those space stations, and we're looking at, what it will be like to consider program spaces for the Spaceport Master Plan, like, healthcare facilities, education facilities, everything that will serve you as a passenger, maybe to benefit and protect the health, to be a vital part of that passenger's journey, both pre and post destination. And so we're thinking about transitioning our airports to really support commercial space travel. And we're also considering how they can support platforms for clinical research and medical developments, and what type of educational and community-focused facilities we'll need to design to accommodate these types of exploration. And, as a part of that, we're also trying to understand how these will integrate into communities and grow in popularity among civilian passengers. And we expect that there will be a lifestyle of space travel to really give birth to a new set of priorities that will accelerate trends and have defined, a new modern aerial travel. And so we are looking at how our spaceports can actually be defined and designed around that. And even more than just a new kind of travel and exploration, the spaceport really opens up to a new frontier of technology, research, education, medicine. And it really can be a place where people gather, watch space launches, and participate in community events. And we've reached out to several communities that are attached to the spaceports here in the US to really try to identify what they do need from these spaces, or what they're expecting as far as research and development and education. And it's really interesting to hear what people have to say about the space industry. And there's a lot of positivity around traveling to space as well. Lots of optimism right now. So one thing that we have learned as a part of space travel is that the more that we explore space, the way that we experience the world that we live in here on Earth is actually changing. And so, I do want to bring in the original moonshot, which was when Kennedy, said that we would actually be going to the moon. And, he gave this challenge in 1961. And when he did, we didn't actually have the materials to go to the moon. We didn't have any of the technology. We didn't have anything near lightweight components to fly all the way to the moon. We didn't have size reduction capability. We didn't have the advanced communications. We didn't have the math literally, or the physics. And in 8 years, we accomplished that moon landing. And I say all of this because, you know, we were able to do that without all of the unknowns. Today, we have all of these things. And so at this point, you know, as we're growing the economy, it's important to remember where we were. But what's also important to remember is that even though we have all of these technologies now, we're still evolving technologies as a part of the space race today. And the evolution of all of these things that we didn't have led us to a lot of things we can't live without today. So things like water filters and baby formula, things like a joystick for your video games, or even the phone that you carry around in your pocket. You know, all of these things are directly attributable to what we learned from that first moonshot. And so it's important to know that as we continue to travel out to space, we will see a change in our world down here, and we will be able to kind of reap the benefits, even if we're not the ones that are traveling up to space just yet. We're also, you know, aware that introducing the general public to commercial space travel will open up opportunities for new career paths that haven't yet existed. So things like astro artists, zero gravity reproduction and conception specialists, not something I ever thought I would have to say in a public forum. Lunar and Martian brewers and farmers, those people will be extremely important for our life on the moon. We'll have a lot of generalists in a lot of different areas. We will look at lunar excavators and mechanics. They will be extremely important to how we build our communities, either on the moon or on Mars. We also might have some specialties in the world of architecture and social isolation, which two words that don't typically go together, but you know, social isolation is a great area of study if you are interested in designing for isolated experiences. And then, you know, something that we may not have considered is when we do occupy the moon at some point, will we have lunar taxi pilots that will help us hop across the moon to different locations in different communities? So these are things that we can start to think about as we're talking about education and innovation in our spaceports. And, you know, just to end on the original moonshot, you know, we don't do these things because, you know, they're easy. We do them because they are hard, but we actually, you know, listen to JFK. These are risks and there are risks and cost to action, and they're far less than, you know, comfortable inaction. And I think it's important that because we have the capability to do this exploration, that we actually do achieve some great opportunities for ourselves here on Earth with this exploration as well. So, you know, with that being said, you know, aviation master planning and spaceport master planning, it's an extremely important process that really touches on multiple industries. It connects a variety of communities. It can really impact the world, and you know, it will be integrated into planning for, you know, emerging behaviors and evolving technologies. And also our aviation clients are already looking to how they can transition their spaceports, transition their airports into spaceports for the future. So we're looking to remain flexible and agile to really accommodate commercial space travel in the future. And that's what I have to share with you today. And I just kind of want to open it up to questions if there are any.
First of all, this is Sumastina. Sam, that was really fantastic. So much to think about and so many questions. I don't know where to start. But I was just interested, you know, in what you said when you initially talked about Boom and sort of just even, I guess, faster space travel and what that might do to sort of make the world smaller. And you said, you know, we could share cultures in an easier way. And I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about that. I mean, what do you see as the implications of that, just from a, you know, I guess just having access to culture in a quicker way?
Yeah, so the CEO of Boom, I got to meet him a few years ago, and this was before they had their commercial spacecraft. And whenever I was talking to him, he he shared a story that really touched my heart. And I think that that's where all of my research starts, because anytime I talk about a project, I'm like, well, here's the story that touched my heart, and this is where we researched it. But he said that he met his wife when he was traveling abroad in Japan, and they got married, and she moved to the States with him, and they ended up having a couple of kids. But her parents still lived in Japan, and so they only got to see her parents, you know, once a year, if that. It wasn't really easy to make that trip every year, especially with 2 toddlers. And so they relied a lot on, you know, FaceTime when it became available to them, but that only happened when the kids got older. And it really, you know, he really took it to heart, because he wished that there was an easier way for them to see each other in person. And that was the impetus of him creating Boom, is so that they could be able to visit each other in not a 15-hour flight, but a 6-hour flight. And that would just make it easier on all parties involved. And I thought that that was really incredible, and, you know, a little bit more heartfelt. And when we are talking about Boom and kind of shrinking the time that it takes, you know, we think about opportunities like going to London for lunch and back. You know, is that something that we could see with Boom? But also, you know, could we start to experience other cultures if Boom does become something that is a part of our aircraft mix? And it will be. We already see American Airlines investing, United Airlines is investing as well. So if it does become a part of our aircraft mix in our everyday flight schedule, is it possible to start thinking about how often we can travel to other countries and, you know, start learning more about their cultures? From my experience, when we do go to other cities and other countries and other cultures, we actually do start to open our mind and start to build empathy for others. And us, you know, in the architecture industry and as designers, that empathy is extremely important. You know, we talk about this when we talk about AI. You know, as architects, there are a lot of parts of our job that can be automated in the future, but building empathy for the people that we're designing for will not be something that AI can automate. And so this Boom actually has such a real impact on us as designers and on us as people and us as cultures to start connecting around the world. And it can also, you know, it does get above orbit, so it could also give people a little taste of that overview effect, which has been shown to, you know, really have an impact on people, and a lasting impact, to have, you know, really big changes in their lives. And so I do think that it has a big opportunity to, you know, play a big role in the future of our world. Not to sound overly optimistic, but I do really do think about shrinking that time and giving it back to people is extremely important, and connecting cultures is extremely important.
Thank you so much. That's timely. I'm about to jump on a 20-hour, well, total of 20 hours of flying time from where I am back home to LA. So I would welcome that in the future, that's for sure.
Well, thank you for joining from wherever you are. I'm really excited.
I'm in India.
Oh, goodness. Yes, you do need to jump on a Boom soon.
Sam, this is Jan, and from the LA office. This was fantastic. I actually had a specific question about something you mentioned about the spaceport being more sustainable in like an arid desert condition. What is the reason for that?
So with the arid conditions, we actually have a lot of opportunity to take over some of the land that technically right now isn't really habitable. And you know, when we're looking at those arid conditions, they also provide a lot of opportunity to do a lot of testing where we wouldn't be able to do that same testing in different climates, and that testing being for life on Mars or harsher climates. So it allows us the opportunity to kind of move in a lot of different directions that in other locations we don't necessarily need to do. So it's not necessarily that it will be more sustainable. It's more that we have opportunities that we have to commit to in those locations in order to make the spaceport viable. And because of that, we will be learning from that and be able to share what we learn for the other communities that we're developing in other planets and on lunar locations as well. So I may have misstated that a little bit, but thank you for letting me have the opportunity to clarify.
Oh, no. Actually, I was also curious about something you said about those spaces being completely accessible without what did you say? Accessible by the local transport? Is that what you said? In the sense that you don't need to have, I mean, the access to those spaces, how will that be?
So in those locations in particular, some of the clients that we're talking to, they're very interested in accessing the airport via or accessing the spaceport via eVTOL flight. And
Okay.
in that particular instance, that would mean that there wouldn't be any passenger subways or any passenger rail or any passenger roads, which could lead to a little bit more sustainability in the fact that we're not having as much of an impact on the environment. But that's only particular to a couple of the clients that we've spoken to in some of those arid areas. And the reason that they're wanting to do that is because they see the opportunity where they've already started to pave roads with, painting it white to reflect the sun. They're already having issues, and they're hoping to reduce some of those issues with new developments.
Got it. Thank you, Sam. That was fantastic.
I see a hand up, Mark. Another Tina.
Yeah. Hi, great presentation. This is very, very cool. My question is, I recently listened to another presentation about developing, space infrastructure, construction technology, with the programs in NASA or other startups. At the time, I was joking about like, oh, we're gonna have to ship a lot of, construction workers, CA architects, robotic engineers to even like manage the construction and infrastructure building. I wonder if there's any of the aspect for design for demographics like that in your research. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, when we're thinking about spaceports here on Earth, we are looking at rocket manufacturing facilities, and we're looking at a lot of different opportunities that will have job creation here on Earth. When we're talking about lunar communities or Martian communities, but I'll stick to lunar communities because I feel like those are a little bit more in the realm of achievability in the next coming decades, especially because we've had conversations with NASA's lunar excavation team, who is looking at how we can start to design and develop these types of communities. And when we're talking about the workforce, that's the first thing that they're interested in, because as we're building those spaceports, or what they're calling Earth ports, on the moon or on Mars, when we're looking at designing those master plans, we can't do that without people. We can do a lot of it with robotics, but there are still going to be people. There are still going to be astronauts. It's not all going to be remotely designed and operated. And so the first thing that we have to do when we get there is develop the communities where they will live. And, in that case, we're also providing job opportunities and upskilling for people to move into those opportunities. Because, we talked a little bit about the generalists that will be needed. We talked a little bit about the different types of mechanics that will be, needing on the moon. But these people, even with the skills that they might have that are required here on Earth, it's different when you're going into a harsh environment and one that you're not particularly used to or even particularly trained for. And so we do have to be aware of, when we're designing the spaces for these communities on the moon or on Mars, that we're making sure to give them as much mental comfort and mental, designing for mental stability, as well as for preserving their life in these cabins that we will be designing. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but when we talk to the lunar excavation team, they're not currently considering shipping hordes of people at once to live in a community up there, but more like handfuls. And so they will be smaller isolated communities at first. Now, eventually it will become larger, right? Because if you've seen some of those more futuristic movies, those spaceports become just as operable and just as trafficked as airports here on Earth. And so when we do think about the traffic and start to project that traffic out, we will start to think about more and more people going up there and developing those communities. And the best part about it is, as architects, we can start to think about how we can use those resources more appropriately. You know, we've learned a lot about how we are depleting our resources here on Earth. And we are all very aware that we don't want to do that to other planets or other moons, not necessarily planets. So we do want to make sure that we're designing and working appropriately with the resources that we have.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Samantha. Thank you. This was great. How I love all this stuff. You know, I know you guys have been doing an amazing job. How likely is it for people to be able to afford to take those flights or even to go to space? Or like how many years down the line are we seeing this happening? Especially, I think I'm interested in I'm asking you, I guess, two questions. The international flights that you were talking about, will there be like domestic flights that will be faster, that will take us from like across the country in 2 hours? Do you have any knowledge about that? And
Well,
the affordability factor?
Yeah, for sure. So with Boom, for example, just to start there with their suborbital flight, they actually are selling all of their seats at a business class ticket. So they are under the impression that nobody's going to buy a first class ticket, or that they can't fill all of the seats with only first class tickets. But they are also very well aware that they can't start by selling them at economy and scale up from there. So all of their seats will be business class, which it seems like an attainable compromise for their seats, which, you know, cut the travel time in half. With space travel, you know, what we're seeing now, it's an astronomically high, to me, I don't know about everybody else on the call, but to me, it's astronomically high to go into space to buy one of those tickets. You must have a sponsor, you must have some sort of financial investment, and a lot of times you likely are, you know, representing a different company with different interests. So that's what we're seeing, you know, on Blue Origin. That's what we're seeing on SpaceX for the most part. Virgin Galactic is different. So we are seeing that type of investment, but we're also seeing a little bit more diversity and variety. Now, what I will also say is that we saw a lot of decrease over the last few years in different technologies that are supporting the space industry. So I think we mentioned earlier that to launch a satellite today, it's about $100,000, where only a few years ago, it was over $1 billion to launch one satellite. So that's an incredible decrease in cost for launching satellites. And all of that comes from the technology that we've learned about reusable rockets, the technology that we've learned about, you know, where we can, you know, build, how we build and miniaturize the technology for our satellites. So as we're starting to kind of increase our knowledge in how all of this technology is working together, where it can be adjusted and refined, we will start to see that ticket price decrease. And then also we're seeing a lot of money being injected into the space industry from the private sector. So as of right now, there's about $10 billion of investment into the space race from private sectors, which means that we're at this really weird time and moment in time where there's more investment from private sector than there is from the government. And so we're actually starting to see that job opportunities in aerospace, they're increasing because these private sector players are able to pay livable wages. And I'm not saying that NASA doesn't pay livable wages, but what we're looking at is the government is using their criteria for salaries, which is, you know, bringing in an aerospace engineer at a starting salary of 56 to 75, where, you know, SpaceX and Blue Origin are bringing them at 115 to 135. So these are ways that we're starting to see this space industry expand. And as these salaries become more incentivizing for people, and these industries become more incentivizing for people, and we get more people working on these products that are coming out and the technology that's coming out, we will start to see a decrease across the board in the rockets that we're producing, in the manufacturing line, in the resources that are needed and provided on flight, and then eventually in the ticket price. So that's maybe how I'll respond to that question. But I could always do a little bit more digging to get a better response for you and find a dollar amount that someone's promising somewhere.
Thank you so much. I have one more question. This is Suma again. You talked about, you know, sort of memorable, the implications to creating more memorable architecture as it relates to the 5 senses. And you talked about the sense of smell. And I was just, I know this is a separate topic that you dive deeper into, but are you able to just briefly talk about sort of the olfactory architecture end of Spaceports? That was really fascinating.
You know, olfactory architecture is one of my favorite topics. And you know, I know it's a different topic, but one of the things that we learned in our research is with the Center for Brain Health here in Dallas is that our olfactory bulb it's tied within our limbic system, which is the most primordial part of our brain. And so when we walk into a space, for example, we actually don't see how deep, how wide, how tall it is. We smell it. So we can actually smell how tall a space is, how wide it is. We can smell how much daylight is brought into the space. Has to do with the molecular expansion. And so it's interesting how much our nose tells us before our eyes do, which is really incredible. And that's why, you know, you smell cookies and you're immediately taken back to your grandma's house, or, you know, maybe you smell a cedar chest and you're taken back to your childhood home. So, you know, that sense of smell is extremely tied to our memories and the emotions that we tie back to those memories. It's just a really incredible tool that we can use as designers to, you know, accommodate space that maybe has a lot of restrictions. So say, for example, we're working with a space that we're renovating, and we are stuck with a very tight column grid and small windows. We can use certain smells to help loft the space and make it feel taller. We can use certain scents to help bring in that daylight. And we can even use certain scents to make it feel more vibrant and active if you're wanting to create a more collaborative space. And in our research, we actually have in the past worked with the scent creators at Disney. So they are really creating some profound experiences at Disney. If you've ever been to one of their parks, you've probably bought way too much popcorn and cotton candy because you smelled it on the street, and that's not a real smell. That's a pumped in smell. And there's a lot of other ways that they're using scent across their parks. But the way that we are interested in using it in space is, I wouldn't say necessarily unique, but it is tying back to that idea of memory. One of the things we heard from an astronaut is, you know, she had children and she didn't want to give up this experience to be able to go to the International Space Station. But she didn't realize that once she got there, the overwhelming desire to be with her children was something that was eating away at her. And she felt like she was losing productivity because she was missing her children so much. And, you know, one of the as a short woman, I appreciate this, but one of the easiest ways to remember someone is to smell the top of their head. That just happens to be where a lot of pheromones are. And so we had this idea as she was talking to us to, you know, maybe we could take a couple locks of hair, or, you know, maybe, you know, we could take some sampling of her child's head and create it into a scent that could bring her back some memories and give her a positive reaction to go about doing work throughout her day. There are other scents that, you know, would bring people back to Earth or allow them to have some memory of Earth forth as they're working. And, we would have to regulate what those positive and negative experiences would be. If you smell your child's head, are you more or less likely to continue to want to do your work? So there's a lot of research to be done there. We entered a competition with this idea, and we did get honorable mention for that idea, but we didn't get any funding to pursue. But hopefully in the future, we'll be able to kind of explore scent on the space station a little bit further.
Thank you. That was really great.
Of course.
Okay, any other questions out there?
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, Samantha, for a fantastic presentation. Again, thank you to everyone who helped put this together, Tina and the IAC committee. I guess I'll just say that while space travel and everything that Samantha discussed today is certainly the future, we're still trying to save the planet here. We need to survive on the Earth a few more years. So if you're interested in attending AIALA's 1.5 degrees Celsius symposium on April 19th, I put a link in the chat, and you can purchase tickets there or get more information if you're interested. We're still working on a venue. We should have one locked down by the end of the week. And then we're also starting to schedule for our 2024 Spring Arc Tour Fest from May 16th to the 19th. We have some great tours lined up. Please check out our website. Again, thank you everyone for attending today's Design and Spaceports event. We hope to see everyone at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Thank you again. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Samantha.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.